ask questions or put questions in the chat box. This is your session, so it can't be judged as a success over the 4 weeks if you go away and didn't really quite, get something that was relevant to you. So you can ask questions, you can share experiences as we go through. So don't be shy at all to put your hand up and comment or ask a question as we go through. I'm very happy to do that. So just a little bit, very brief background on myself. My mother, I have to admit, I think she wanted me to be a Catholic priest, like in all like full disclosure, right? And then it was a lawyer, and then I disappointed her by becoming a market researcher, I think. But I started off in Australia in the mid-90s working in market research, and even at that time I was also working on Japan projects. So I had studied Japanese studies at university, and so I had an interest in those Japanese projects, so was taking on those projects. And then I had the opportunity to open up the office for my company at the beginning of 1999, and I did that for 4 years. The area of work that I was working in was communications testing and tracking. So I did an enormous amount of work on breaking down what makes communication effective, providing some prediction of effectiveness, and then tracking that. So that was very interesting. And I was working with clients like Unilever that had very big budgets and so forth, and really needed to have that information to help them manage their investment. I've been going since 2003 as an independent researcher, and nowadays we have about 40 researchers in between Tokyo and Osaka, and we do all sorts of different projects. So we do very exploratory work through to extremely systematized quantitative tracking studies as well. So we do the whole gamut, and there certainly is more than one tool in market research that you have access to. We're going to focus on the survey side of it, more the quantitative side in this course, but I am going to start off by giving you a little bit of a background on the other tools as well, so that you know when you do a survey, here's what I'm looking at, here's how I place this in context, and I hope that will be helpful. So just in terms of an overall aim of the course, I would say it's to give you some meaningful exposure. I can't turn you into a researcher in 4 sessions, but you'll have enough exposure to understand what's possible. Certainly as a user of research, as someone who may be commissioning research or reviewing research or criticizing it, certainly you can get that exposure to those market and survey research methods. And that should help you understand, interpret, and leverage the way Japanese publics respond to your efforts. So this, in a sense, is like what I think is the mission statement for the next 4 weeks. And I'm also a big believer in you stating a mission statement for your research as well. And we'll get into that at the end of today's session. So in terms of objectives, I'm going to introduce what I would call market research thinking, just to give you a bit of an overview of the way that we approach problems in market research and the way that we look at things. We'll look at how to match your research objectives with the correct methodology, because you can get yourself into trouble if you're using the wrong methodology. You can get stuck and get too much data or not enough data, and you can get to the end of the project and you may not get as much as you had hoped out of the project. So very much, you've got to think about your broad objective and then your more specific objectives and think, can this methodology really meet those objectives? So it's a very good part of market research thinking, of course, is to question all the time. So you really want to question your methodology. But getting into tin tacks in a little bit more detail, certainly there'll be introductory exposure to survey research. So we'll look at sampling. Sampling I'll go into in quite some detail because it is extremely important. If you don't have the right sample in your research, if you're not interviewing the right people or surveying the right people, your results will be worthless. So it's very misleading at worst, right? So that's very, very important that we sort of think about, you know, what we're doing in sampling. And that's always a case of, you know, what's practical. We've always got a budget that we're working to, so you're never going to be able to do everything perfectly, but what's going to be useful for you. I'll then go into questionnaire design. This is extremely important that you know how to put a good questionnaire together. It's not particularly difficult, but that there are some rules and sort of procedures and rules of thumb and just, you know, traditional ways of doing things in questionnaires which tend to work, which are quite effective. Then I'll have a go at getting you to actually write some questions. So to put together a little bit, parts of a questionnaire, if you like. And then we'll look at data analysis and reporting and storytelling, which should get pretty interesting because actually we're going to get our hands dirty with this. I have a real life database that we can look at, which deals with perceptions of the US in Japan. It's real data that was collected some years ago. And so you'll have a chance, first of all, to see, okay, here's what a professional questionnaire looks like. Here's the sample frame. So here's how the field work was done, or here's the set of people among whom that field work was done. And then here are the data tabulations. There you go. There's a set of data. Okay, well, I've got to give a presentation to, I don't know, the ambassador or whoever tomorrow or next week. What are we going to tell them? And this is great. It's great that you've got like the raw stuff, because you'll see all the weaknesses that come out when you do a survey in terms of like, oh, I'm not quite sure how to interpret that question, or, you know, what does this mean? Or the answer to this seems a little bit contradictory to that, you know, what do I think the respondent was thinking when they did the questionnaire? All of those sorts of things come out when you analyze surveys. So I think in terms of looking at a way of exposing you to what research is really like, and how you actually have to grab that and turn that into a story, I think this is great. And it's, of course, a very relevant set of data for you guys as well. So we have that to look forward to. So just in more detail on today's agenda, we have a hard finish at 4 o'clock. And I think that will be enough time to go through. Today is kind of big picture. We're not getting too nitty gritty today, although there is an exercise at the end of today. So if we have enough time, we can do it during the class, or you can think about it, you know, after class. But I'll take you through, as I mentioned at the beginning, market research thinking. We'll review just at a very top level the families of research methods, think about how to connect the methods to your research objectives, and then we'll talk in more detail about measurement research, because that is the focus of this training. So, is there a wider purpose for market research? I believe that there is, and I've believed for many years that research and the work that we do in research, when we survey people and we poll people, when we do focus groups and talk in a more unstructured way with people, I think this is a very, very socially useful function in the economy and society. And I felt for many years that we actually uniquely in market research give people a voice. So people, generally speaking, when you think about it, have very little opportunity to influence decisions that are made in their lives, right? So we often think about, okay, we can map that onto politics and so forth, but even things like how a service and product experience is put together, like unless that is done with some degree of reference and up to collaboration with the consumer, the people who are consuming that good or service are not going to have had any opportunity to input into that. So I think that giving the consumer a voice, giving the voter a voice, or what have you, I think really leads to better outcomes for people. So I think market research is a very important craft or profession or whatever you want to call it, and I'm always on it, my people, about that. But I hope also that that's an idea that might sort of start to grow within everyone today. So it's all about people, right? But there are highly in research, right? There's highly contextual definitions of people, right? So a person could be a customer. So if let's say if I run a restaurant, they may be someone who's come to my restaurant. That's quite possible. So in that case, we're talking to them as a customer. We often talk about consumers. I think consumer is a very overused word, but I can't stop using it because it's so appropriate in many ways. Like, we're all consumers, every single one of us. We consume. So you could just call consumers people, but anyway, you'll often hear that terminology. But we also hear a lot more these days about users. So when we're doing things like user experience research, let's say if you make a new website, you may want to have people have a go through it and work out, is it a pleasing experience to use the website? Are things easily accessible? If there are tasks that they need to do, can they do that? Can they do that in a fast and easy to understand way? So things like, maybe visa applications or, doing stuff at the embassy or whatever is a perfect example of where, user research may be appropriate. And I was a user and a customer at the consulate in Naha a couple of weeks ago. And I just want to give a shout out to anybody in Naha who's on the call. Like, the guys were just delightful. They were very, very lovely to deal with. And it was a very good experience, actually. But they're the kind of, that kind of feedback I just gave you, that's the kind of feedback you can get out of doing your surveys. We could also be talking about prospects. They could be people who, let's say if we're talking about inbound tourism to US, if that's part of any of your briefs there. Certainly, yeah, we can think about people as prospects, people who might be traveling overseas. They may be considering going to a beach destination. Hawaii might be part of that. For example. Citizens, of course, when we think about, I guess citizens and voters here, if you like, when we think about political polling and so forth as well, polling on like issues, if you like. Certainly that's the frame in which we look at people as well. So, and this is not an exhaustive list of definitions of people as well. But it is all about people and people playing different roles when we interview them. And we need to be kind of aware of what those different roles are when we interview them. Like we really need to sort of have that interaction. So if I'm talking to a customer, it needs to be done in a certain way. If I'm talking to a voter, that needs to be done in a different voice, perhaps. All of that stuff we need to think about. So in a nutshell, in market research, we're deploying, I'd call them like elicitation methodologies, right? So whether it's a one-on-one interview or a focus group or a survey, or it's a face-to-face survey or an online survey or a stand-up survey, we're eliciting information, right? We're eliciting information and feedback. And the reason why we're doing this is to ensure that the decisions that we make are made with reference to people. Not to belabor the point, but in a democracy, we require the cooperation of people, right? So if we want cooperation and we want to make an impact, it's extremely helpful to elicit the way that they think and feel and respond and think about the future. Very, very useful. So that's just I guess the overall background of market research. I'd also say that I think most of you are aware that Japan, probably out of all of the countries that one might study as an outsider, can be one of the most challenging to understand. The values can be different. And in my agency, we've done quite a lot of work on values in Japan and working out, you know, what makes people tick here? What do they value? So why do, for example, why does it seem like Japanese are less engaged with issues of sustainability, for example, as they may be in other markets? So by the way, I think that's actually changing and changing very quickly. But there are they're sort of very interesting preferences and differences that we see in Japan that can be uniquely difficult to understand. The other point to make about sort of cultural difference as well is that, like, cultural difference isn't actually absolute. Like it's very, very, you know, often you'll hear that the difference between the genders is further within one culture than the difference between one culture and another culture. That certainly can be true, but of course we're looking at, if anything is, you know, over indexes above the average as a characteristic in a population, it becomes defining in a way. So we can overplay cultural differences. We can be talking about them all the time, and we can get ourselves into knots because there are many things that are very similar between cultures, but also we need to be aware that Japan does have some unique characteristics. So just because something works in Taiwan doesn't mean it's going to work in Japan. Just because something works in Singapore doesn't mean it's going to work in Japan. Sometimes it means if something works in Japan, it's likely to work in Taiwan and Singapore. That can work too, because there's sort of interesting dynamics there as well. But anyway, I think that's enough on that point there. But suffice it to say, understanding people, their needs, their preferences and aspirations is key to laying the path to successful cross-cultural engagement. So you really need to have that understanding, and what we're doing in research is very much about that. So I love this quote by George Bernard Shaw, Irish playwright here. He said, the single biggest problem in communication is the illusion that it has taken place. We see this all the time. It doesn't just have to be cross-cultural. It can be within the same culture. It can be in an advertising campaign. It can be in a PR campaign. It can be anything. It can be internally within organizations. One of the amazing things that we can do with survey research is we actually can measure whether communication has taken place in a measurable way. This is an example that I've adapted here, but this is down the bottom here. These red bars are what we call gross rating points, and the scale here is weeks. So this is like time. This is like time series here, and then the green line is the percentage of people in the sample who are saying that, let's say it's Hawaii, for example, who are it's not, but because it's mocked up data, but let's say it's the percentage of people who are saying that Hawaii has undisturbed natural beauty, right? So we can see that during this campaign here, the perception that Hawaii has undisturbed natural beauty actually fell. But when we did campaign 2 here, we can see it rose very strongly. And then campaign 3, it started to fall again. Whereas all of the campaign 1, 2, and 3 seem to have done a fairly good job at keeping this friendly and welcoming perception going up as well. And you can see there's almost like in campaign 2, there's like almost like a synergistic effect here between beauty and friendly and welcoming. So this is a very, very classic way of looking at market research. So the people who are running the campaign, they want to know whether the campaign is actually having a measurable impact on perceptions of Hawaii, right? This kind of technique is often used by brands that are advertising and have very large budgets, because they need to see whether it's having an impact. But there are many different ways of measuring this. This is a continuous study, which means that people are in field every week of the year. They're producing moving averages on that. But we might also, go in once a year and ask perceptions of a brand or a destination or something like that. So yeah, so is everybody okay with that so far? Any questions, comments? Okay. Right, so next chart. Well, there's a lot that we need to understand, right? So first of all, and these can all be addressed with research. So first of all is like, who is a receptive target for us? So if we are going to start a new program, who's the target that we want to talk to? So there are questions about that. It may be, well, who's the most negative and who we need to convert, or it could be who's the most positive, and we feel that when we do our work among that target, that they are going to show the most evidence of positive movement there. It depends on the situation, but at least if you do your research, you'll have a much better situational understanding there. I think also very important is, how are we viewed? Right. So what's our image? Like, are we? And I get the two obviously are interconnected in terms of who's a receptive target, but our opportunity to communicate and our opportunity to make a difference is impacted by the way people think of us and what people's presuppositions are and prejudices are and so forth. And that's the same if you're a brand of shampoo, and it's the same if you're a country brand. It's very dynamic is quite similar. Another very, very important question in communication, which we can address in research, is how to be in rapport. So how do I get you to listen to me? How do I issue a message to you where you feel that I really understand you? This is extremely important in Japan in communications. Like, so how do I, not from the, sometimes from the beginning of when we try to sell people, or we try to give them a message or a new idea, we can fall out of rapport. People are just not open to what we have to say necessarily from the beginning. And I'm going to take you through a fairly interesting example from Australian beef, from a project that we did quite some years ago that kind of touches on some of those ideas. Then, of course, are our messages registered? So we may produce a piece of communications, we may hold an event, we may do a whole bunch of different activities. We might be doing social media and, digital properties and so forth, but are our messages that we think we're giving, are they actually registering, and are they the messages that we intend? This is a classic as well, where sometimes you might be talking about one thing and people might take away a different message because there's something in what you said that was interesting to them that you didn't anticipate, or it triggered them, or you know, something like that. Also, generally speaking, in communication, the fewer messages, the more single-minded you are in your communication, the easier it is to actually register those messages. So the more, if you're doing a communications program with lots of different objectives, it can be harder to get to that single-minded message. And the effectiveness can tend to be less as well. And we also need to bear in mind that unless you're dealing with massive budgets too, the sort of efficiency and the elegance of your communication is really directly related to its effectiveness a lot of the time. So somewhat related to what I was saying before, like, are we being understood? So we may be, for example, we may be issuing the message, but do people really understand it? Or like, why are these people talking about this? Or, you know, it's very dangerous, I find, when respondents and clients, especially clients in Japan, say, I don't understand what you just said. It usually means something like, I reject it, but it's a very nice way of saying that. So understanding is very, 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 very important, whether it's a euphemism or not. And then, of course, is there an impact to our efforts as well? So like, let's say if we've got the right target, we're talking the right way in view of the way we're viewed, we're in rapport, we're getting the message over, it's well understood. So then what? Like, what is our actual, what's our actual baseline thing that we want to move the needle on, right? So if it's a more commercial objective, let's say it's visiting the US on holidays, do we see an increase in intent to visit? Do we see an increase in positive perceptions of X, Y, or Z? Do we see more signups on the website or travel, or however it is you define that? And then, of course, if not, what do we do differently? If we're not seeing that impact as much as we want, how do we go through and, you know, this is obviously not the only model of effectiveness you could look at, but you know, what can we do differently? There'll be hints, right? There'll be those areas where people respond less well than you had hoped. You also need to have an idea of what responding well actually looks like. That can be an issue in Japan because there are cultural differences in the way that people engage with research. But certainly you should get some diagnostic feedback that helps you there. So research is not just about collecting information too. I think it's very much about seeing the social and business environment in new ways, seeing opportunities that you may never have thought of before, and sparking ideas, right? So there's more than just, you know, like a measuring or a seeing what is kind of role of research. There can be an inspiration part. There can be a part to research that says, well, here are my possibilities for action. So the research should always give you some thoughts and some potentially promising paths that you may be able to take. I think it's good research if it allows you to do that. And of course, you know, like sometimes you have sparks of ideas and they blow up, not in a good way. Research has a very, very important de-risking aspect to it as well. So you'll see certain product launches that bomb, and I just look at them and I think if only you'd just done some very basic market research on this, you would not have made that decision to launch that product in that way. And sometimes the brands that most at danger from that are the really successful brands, right? Because they have a track record of being successful. So they start to think that, well, they can't fail, or, you know, the customer's just sort of hanging out for what we have to offer. And that's often, you know, that's often not the case. So certainly, you know, and you know, we'll see that in this market, if people reject something, it's usually a hard rejection. It's where sometimes, especially when you're doing qualitative research and focus groups, less structured work, people can say positive things, and you have to be a little bit discerning on what they're saying, because people will try to help you. You know, respondents in Japan are very nice usually, but a rejection is a rejection for sure. So anyway, but it's better to know. It's better to know before you spend the $5 million on the campaign, I think. But anyway, in terms of market research, well, here are 3 things I think it should do. It needs to be descriptive. You need to be able to describe a situation. It needs to be diagnostic. You have to say why something is what it is, and it needs to be predictive, ideally, to give you some idea of what's going to happen. If you've done really good research, and we can't always do this, but if you get to the point where you say, well, if I do A, then this is likely to happen. If I do B, then this is the most likely thing to happen. If I do C, this is the most likely thing to happen. Give you a set of kind of at least choice vectors there that you can look at and say, oh, okay, well, we know that if we start positioning ourselves in this way, we're going to attract older people. And if we do it this way, it's going to be younger people, and so on and so forth. So let me give you an example of descriptive market research. So this is some work that we did. This is secondary research, actually. We didn't do the survey, but this is survey research for an environmental organization that's looking at cars. So we're looking at the expression of interest in buying a car is down 8% since 2017. Now, this is a very worrying trend if you're Nissan. Maybe if you're Toyota, you're ahead of the game. I don't know. But, you know, if you're a second tier or third tier manufacturer of cars in Japan, this is a big problem. And this is a long-term trend, like baby boomers. So what slide are we looking? Can you see my slide with the lady who's pointing at the windscreen? Yeah, okay. All right. Alicia's having some problems in Corby there. So I'll keep going if everyone can see the lady who's pointing out the window. So then we have main use for cars among younger population, you know, 59% commuting to work to school. Okay, that's good. But just to my previous point, in the baby boomer times, the car was everything. Like the people would, at a very young age, want to buy a car, and they'd want to go everywhere around with their girlfriend or boyfriend, and it was really, really important to have a car, and that's changed a lot. So for millennials and younger people, that's really changed. We see this as a long-term thing here, and we've now to the point we can see in 2019 we've got 40% of younger people who say they can live without buying a car, and then we've got 55%, you know, who are cool with using rental cars, and a third of people who are intent on using car sharing services there. So here's a description, right? The description is the car's losing favor as a form of transport. You know, you'd almost, reading in between the lines, you'd almost say it's becoming a bit of a pain for people to have a car. But that's descriptive, right? We're describing a situation. Intent to or consideration of cars is falling. You know, people are saying they don't need a car. That's description. So diagnosis is, well, why do people not want to have a car as much as they used to before? So the top reason for non-car ownership is increasingly high maintenance costs. So people don't want to have to pay the high cost of gasoline to park, to have the shuck end done, all of that kind of stuff, insurance, taxes, etc. So the diagnosis that's been presented here is that it's a financial issue. And it certainly seems that way. I think the environmental, we don't see that much off the bat evidence that the environmental aspect of owning cars has cut through that much. It seems to be a financial more than anything at the moment. But of course, our client wants to change that. So, you know, that's our work with them. It's like, how do you actually get people to care more about the drawbacks environmentally? So predictive here. So interest in a future purchase of a new secondhand car. So there's an agency here, CarterJMRN, did a study in March 2021, showed that only 22% of the Japanese population currently consider a car acquisition within the next 1 to 3 years. So again, my analyst says that that's low. Like, I think one of the maybe it's high. You know, like 22% of Japan is actually quite a lot of people. So I think always with quantitative research and with predictive stuff, you sort of say, well, what is a high score? What's a low score? If I have an event and I say, how likely are you to come to another event put on by our organization? How do we know if that's a high or a low score? There are, you know, we can go into that when we go into the analysis part, but that's always very important. So just throwing out a number there doesn't necessarily tell us that much. That numbers need benchmarks, they need context, a whole, you know, there's a whole sort of thinking that needs to go around that, because you can get numbers out of a survey and you can build, you know, almost any story around those numbers that you like. It may not be a particularly compelling story. I hope if you have to make presentations to people that your thinking is solid. But you know, you really do have to have a framework to say these are good results, these are poor results, these are high results, these are low results, these are expected results, these are surprising results. You know, all of that's needed. So what should we expect from good market research? So I think new thoughts, which are often hard to generate on our own. After you've done a survey, you should say, oh, okay, I didn't really think that would be the response we'd get on that. And so then you think, well, why is that? You start to build your stories on that. And then, of course, insights that, you know, we can't access without having done the work. So what's an insight? I mean, insight's a very, very overused word. It's very, very overused. It can be like, I mean, I had a client bail me up 3 years ago and say, what's an insight? And I was like, oh, God, you know, put me on the spot. But I should know that. That should roll off the tongue. But I would define an insight as simply the meaning of the information. Right. So when you're presenting a set of results, in order to sort of go up the ladder on insights, it's really a case of saying, well, here are the results, but here's what it means, and here's what it means for us. Right, so there's a bit of putting yourself in the shoes of the respondent and sometimes you have to kind of you have to surmise a few things about why they're answering the questions the way that they are. If it's a quant survey, but definitely, you know, the meaning of that. So how do you know that you've had an insight? Well, it's because the insight, as Stan here, who's just, I think he's just stepped down as global head of research at Unilever. He said, well, insight, I saw this at a conference and I wrote it down. He goes, insight is always retrospectively self-evident. Oh, it's absolutely true, that point on insight. It's like once you've said it, everyone's like, oh yeah, of course it's like that. But of course you didn't think that before you did the work. But now we all take that as being kind of obvious. You know, we did a project for insurance about 3 or 4 years ago, and I couldn't come up with a better insight for the way that everything was coming out, is that people just hate insurance companies. They hate you. This is the insight. Like I said that to the client, they you know, they took it the right way because they could see that. But the insight is, yeah, this is why you're having so much trouble, you know, getting people to engage with you, because they don't trust you. So they're pushing back on you, and they're putting sand in the gears of the purchase journey, and you know, that kind of thing. So let me. Does anyone have any comments or questions or challenges? Have I outraged anyone yet with any of those ideas? Nothing? Okay, all right. Well, I'm going to talk about a real life example here, another real life example. So this is Aussie beef. So they're kind of like the competitor for US beef, I guess. You know, I mean, I get some of these Australian clients, as you can imagine, being Australian and all. Anyway, they were back in, this was about 2012. It was almost 10 years ago. They wanted to completely relaunch everything, or they wanted to revive the brand, right? So Aussie beef is a very famous brand, like this kind of triangle Aussie, the very, very famous campaigns in the 80s and 90s for Aussie beef that people still remembered. Their idea was iron in beef makes you Genki. So we in Australia, like the idea that iron is in beef and that it's good for you has been used since the 1980s. It's been like it's one of the obvious attributes of beef, and it's especially well known that women need to eat beef as well too, because it's helpful if you're a female to have that extra iron there. And so their tagline was Tetsu de Genki. Interestingly enough, US beef was also saying Genki at the same time. So we ended up with these, you know, very in-depth conversation, like what is Australian Genki and what is American Genki, and how do you differentiate beef and so forth. But what we found is that actually Genki is not something that people understand in relation to beef. But remember, I was saying we have to check if people understand. People just didn't, like, I get it, but I'm not Japanese. Like, I'm not the market. So like, I understand that when you're feeling a bit run down, you might eat a steak and then you might feel better the next day. But there's this whole kind of world of Genki, right? There are many different Genkis. There's like the Genki of the 95-year-old lady who's, you know, still getting up every day and going to the supermarket, and, you know, there's Genki kids and all of that kind of thing. So it wasn't really understood in that sense. The other issue was that nutritionally, Japanese like favor balance. So the typical 5 dishes that you would have in a traditional Japanese meal is, for Japanese, is common sense on nutrition. So the idea that you kind of super upweight one nutrient is actually not common sense in Japan. Like, even though it's common sense in Australia, it's not common sense in Japan. And then we found that, yes, it was very much kind of like it was the clean and green environment of Australia, which was what people connected to. So it was kind of like, you know, go back to basics, guys. And that's what we were able to tell them. And there was a quantitative aspect to this project as well. So it was qualitative and quantitative. So that's an example. So we said to them basically, like, do this over years, right? Like don't do this immediately. Do this slowly. Like, build your communication up. It's like, establish rapport with people, re-establish rapport on your key brand attributes and values. Then start to talk to them about more, more complex messaging. So any questions or comments or anything like that? Does anyone get exposed to projects in their work that sort of have similar objectives in terms of promoting US produce and goods and services? No. All right. Well, I'll keep, but feel free to pop something in the chat box if you're so disposed. So, how do we get to good insights, right? So, first of all is, you know, looking at market context. So you'll notice I've spoken quite a lot about market context already. So we need to know the market in which we operate. We could look at this, I mean, we've called it like a cultural zeitscape, you know, zeitgeist, you know, whatever. But getting to square one requires a good understanding of like the social life drivers of people who are in your market. So when we do research, like when we do market research, as you may understand, survey research, we're kind of getting inside one person's head or a group of people's heads at the same time. But we're really looking at what people are able to think and what they're able to respond. Like, obviously, right? But there's a whole bunch of stuff that acts upon people that they can't necessarily talk about. And so this is the idea that, sure, talk to people, run questionnaires through with people, but also have a very good idea of everything else that's going on with them as well, because it's going to help you to understand the way that they respond or don't respond, and also what they're likely to do in future. So these are things like, what are people's cultural icons and beliefs? What are the trends in popular culture? You know, what are the brands that are popular? What brands are meaningful to them? You know, what's their relationship to fashion, media, art, architecture? How's media and world events affecting them, even into religion and belief systems? Where are we at on, you know, societal, environmental stuff, and also geopolitical and overseas cultural influence as well. So understanding all of that stuff will help you to understand the way that people are responding to the work that you actually do with them. And in terms of you being able to create insight and you being able to explain what you're seeing, this is very useful. Just an example here, this is some work that we did a few years ago for a quick service restaurant chain. I'm assuming a QSR, like also known as fast food, except we're not allowed to call it that. But we did, this is part of a much larger presentation, of course, but we did, like this is a company from the southern US that, you know, has a lot of fried food and, you know, typical kind of American fast food. So we're saying, well, you're coming into Japan, so you should know about what it's like in Japan here. So we looked at things like aesthetics, you know, the way that the food looks is very, very important. And we looked at their photography that they'd done of their food. We looked at what they actually did in the States, food photography wise, and it was just on an instant like just look at it instantly, you could see this did not look appetizing in Japan. Like food photography is just amazing in this country. It's very, very important how it looks. Balance, I referred to earlier with the Aussie beef example. Purity is very important in food. You know, people tend to go for they tend to concentrate on one ingredient often. You know, Japanese food is about bringing out the essence of the food rather than necessarily creating new flavors. Presentation, depth, and even down to gender. So the way that women relate to food is actually quite different to men in Japan, and the way that they're portrayed on TV and so forth, you know, relating to food can be quite different, although that's been changing. There was the wrestler that likes dessert about 10 years ago, and that was worthy of comment, that there was this big wrestler that had a show about cakes. Then we look at things like what we're looking at here are more like themes that we see looking at quick service restaurants in Japan. So for example, you know, premium through urban minimalism. You may notice that there are more and more fast food shops there that sort of have very clean lines, you know, very urban, modern look, or maybe more crafty sort of timber and, you know, more kind of, you know, that kind of thing. So this is a form of research that we call semiotic analysis as well. So you sort of go through and you look at themes and you kind of work out, okay, well, what's emerging in culture, what's dominant in culture, what's fading away in culture. Just background to help you understand, you know, everything about like what you're seeing back from people. So that's sort of culture, if you like. Just a very quick touch on culture. You know, we could do a whole course on culture because it's very, 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 very detailed and interesting. But just to know it's there and to always have that in the background to say, is there a cultural explanation for this? And if so, what might that be? And how would I do that? And you know what, probably if I'm not Japanese, I probably better speak to somebody who is, or more than a few people who are, when I'm actually looking at my research findings. As I say, it's like question, 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 question. So the next thing we look at here is secondary research. Though this is also known as desk research. So this is data that's been previously gathered and mostly exists in reports and publications. It's usually like it's amazing the amount of work that gets done and gets published and gets shared online and in other ways as well. It's really good. If you're researching something, looking through those sources, like looking at results of other surveys can give you an idea before you launch your survey in terms of like, what am I going to expect? What are the issues here? May even help you, if you can get a copy of the questions, may even help you ask the questions. It may be able to accelerate your understanding of your situation so that you might ask different questions when you do the survey, because you've already seen what the results here. The drawback, of course, is that it was done for somebody else's research objective. So they're not answering your question. So when you have a specific question, you need to ask it yourself. So it can help, but you know, there are limitations there. And there's a comment here for secondary research, think public opinion polls from media and department poll surveys. Yes, absolutely. Someone may have already done the work, or they might have done it 2 years ago and you just need to do an update of it. Or it can, you know, it can help you with your early hypothesis generation, I guess. And as I just said, you know, secondary research seldom answers your questions directly. So it's useful to give you a feel for the market and a spark for your hypotheses. And as I say, also, like, even if you look at research that other people have done, It can give you some maybe idea on methodology too, and give you some hints on who to speak to, what the questions should be. Sometimes I'm not saying you need to follow that, because your objectives are unique to what you need to do. But you know, that secondary and that cultural piece is all about context, right? Where are we going into? I can't emphasize how important it is to have that right. When you present research too, if you're presenting it to more senior audiences, they're often going to sometimes jump straight to the big picture. You might be very, very concentrated on your data points, but the audience, and especially the more senior it is, the more big picture their view is going to be. So having that view of the big picture, I think, is very, very important. But then, of course, into that context, you want to put some newly generated information in there. So this is where we get into primary research. So primary research is defined as research that you basically design and carry out yourself. It's for your objectives. It's done by you or by an agency, usually, that you engage to carry out that work. And you own that data, obviously, as well. You're generally not going to share that data unless, but sometimes you may be doing work for publicity purposes as well. That might be one of the research objectives there. But generally, there are two main areas that we're looking at. So the first is exploration and the second is measurement.
My apologies. I couldn't hear what you said.
No, that was my Siri. It was exploration and measurement. And I think just to sort of get those two sort of different functions of research in your kind of consideration somewhere, I think is very, very helpful, because when we're exploring when we should be measuring, and measuring when we should be exploring, is when we get into trouble. So let's say if you're writing a questionnaire and you're just fishing around for pieces of information you don't know, you're going to end up with a very long, very open-ended questionnaire, and it's going to be impossible to analyze it, because whenever you get a question, you've got to remember, whenever you add a question to a questionnaire, it adds complexity. When you add an open-ended question to a questionnaire, it adds, 10 times the complexity. Because normally in a questionnaire, like your answers are pre-coded, right? So anyway, I'll get into that. That's an important part of questionnaire writing, but exploratory research. So we may not know how the target thinks and feels. We may know nothing about that topic. Like let's say if we look at the issue of climate change in Japan, we may say, well, I've kind of got this idea that Japanese don't care about climate change. And then you talk to people and go, oh yeah, no, they don't care about climate change. No. But then of course, you don't really know that. And then when you actually talk to people, you find that there is a much more nuanced situation there. It's like, not that people don't care about it, it's just that they have no empowerment around it. And that's the kind of insight that you get out of exploratory research. So it's hard to get to that insight sometimes from measurement research. And exploration is great the less you know. When you know a lot about something, then yeah, you don't need to do exploratory research, because you've got a pretty good idea. I believe you should dip in occasionally and just check that things still work the way that you think that they do. And exploratory research usually consists of what we call qualitative methods of inquiry. So in research, we talk about qual and we talk about quant all the time. And if I slip into talking that without you understanding what I'm talking about, like, just stop me and put your hand up and put something on the chat box. What are you talking about? right? But qualitative work, and quantitative work are the two main areas that you have in market research. Now, qual is respondent-led. They draw you into their world with qual. Like, you have less structure in qualitative work than you do in quantitative work. So qualitative work is things like focus groups and one-on-one interviews and so forth. But importantly, when you write a questionnaire, you have to realize that you're now defining the parameters of this area of inquiry. You're saying, I'm asking you a question. So first of all, this is the question we should be asking. I know enough about this topic to know that this is the question I should ask, right? And here are the pre-coded answers. It can be this, it can be this, it can be this, it could be that. Or it could be an open-ended question. But I promise you, respondents don't like answering open-ended questions because they want to get that survey over and done with as soon as possible. So yes. One form of qualitative research that we do, I'll sort of get into the methods, is what we call ethnographic research. And this is like, a pure ethnography. My impression of it is just pure observation, right? Looking at people as they live their normal lives and drawing a socio-cultural conclusion from that. But when we do it in our team, we spend time with a targeted group of people. Could be half a day, maybe a day sometimes. So we might go down to the arcade and play video games with them. We might, have a cup of tea with them in their living room. We might go to the sports club with them and watch them do their laps in the swimming pool, whatever. We're just trying to get on the level with people. And like, that type of research is great because there are so many opportunities to ask different questions. There are so many topics that come up that wouldn't otherwise come up. It's a very rich way of actually getting, getting a very broad view of the respondent's life and what's important to them. It also helps you write questionnaires too, because like you can put those questions into questionnaires later. But to cut a long story short, this is a picture of a focus group here. This is very typical focus group. It has a lot of respondents in it. Usually we don't have quite so many, but qualitative research is essentially talking and, more importantly, listening to people in a semi-structured manner. And the analysis is intuitively based. So this is the scary part for qualitative research for many people, which is that, like, we look at the research and we go, oh, okay, well, what do you think? I think these were the themes that came out. And, that lady, I think she really made a very good point in that second focus group we did. And that points to this overall theme, whatever. Usually the discussion is controlled using a discussion guide. So the discussion guide is not a questionnaire. It's like a list of topics. And you don't have to stick to the list of topics in the discussion guide. If people go off in an interesting direction that's relevant to the research objectives, you can do that. And we generally record the process as well, because there's so much that gets said. You may want to go back over the recording and just look for quotes and that sort of thing that helps you with the analysis and helps you sort of think over your conclusions. We can do qualitative work one-on-one or in a group. Like, one-on-one can be good when it's a very sensitive topic. People may not want to speak about certain topics in a group. So if it's business to business, often it'll be done one-to-one, because someone who's working in a business doesn't want to know other people who are it doesn't want other people in the sector to sort of know the way that they're thinking and so forth, or it could be a personal health issue or a social issue or something like that. But here's an example of qualitative research output here. So I was talking about climate change. This is some work that we did on values. And the way that we did that is we created 100 different, what we called value sets. They were like different values and ideas that someone might hold about being a good citizen and being happy in society. And so we got our respondents in a series of focus groups to basically build collages out of that material, and we built them into territories of values. And so we found, these really interesting areas where, very important, we probably felt the most important one is that Japanese are very, very strong on being accountable, being responsible, being accountable. People are very, very responsible in their personal lives. So they expect people who run society, people who run companies and people who run government to be responsible as well. And it's a very, very interesting situation values-wise in Japan, I think, right now with the Olympics, but based on, and COVID, of course, but based on the work that we've done, we can certainly see that why there may be some cracks in the relationship between people and the government at the moment based on those values. But certainly other values, things like protecting the environment, from little things, big things grow. People are patient, right? Patience is a value in Japan, embracing openness and learning, being true to myself, valuing every moment, importance of family and friends, and being a good citizen, right? So why do we do this work? Like why is a wheel like that useful? Is because when you're crafting your messaging, you want to think about, well, what value am I speaking to? What's the most, in my context of what I need to achieve, like what's the relevant value that I'm talking about, right? So if it's public health, right? So what's the value that I'm going to tap into here? So obviously it needs to be, if you're going to go down the road of doing this type of exploratory work, you do it in the context of what your issue is. But in any case, it helps to think about, there could be work that's been done before on values. Sometimes there's published work that can be very interesting. There certainly is in the US, but there are things that are published by people like Hakuhodo Institute of Life and Living, which can be very, very interesting as well, and sort of helps you sort of map on. The other thing is also knowing this stuff helps you write questionnaires, because you know what to ask when you write the questionnaire. So you can literally create attributes out of these values. Having done the work qualitatively helps you understand what the language needs to be and what the expression needs to be around that. But because there's a lot that gets lost in translation too, by the way, from English to Japanese, as you can imagine, if you're writing a questionnaire in English and then translating it into Japanese. But knowing the words that people use, like what's the word that keeps on coming up again and again to describe a particular issue, that can be good to get out of qual. So what we're using qual to explore is how people think, how do they form attitudes, and how do people make decisions. You use it to surface what's important to people. Then you're looking at the basic rational and emotional reactions people have to your ideas, and the ways that you would like to interact with them. And then also getting a little more sort of tin tacks, but I really don't think it's that different whether you're doing country branding or whether you're doing, candy. It's like there are alternatives. So how is Brand USA positioned among those other alternatives? How is Brand USA positioned versus Brand China, or versus Brand Russia or Germany or UK or Australia, or, you know, whatever? You can get a good insight into that from qualitative work. The last point I'll make also is, look, you'll have your context, you'll have your newly generated information, and then you'll have your own experience. This is extremely important. Bringing in your own lived experience if you're a participant in the culture, or, you know, you can get people who are participants in culture, or you're an observer, whatever, that is very useful. Challenges for qual is that it can be difficult to interpret. It can lack reliability. You may not actually be able to get in fact, you don't get the same outcome from one focus group versus another. It can be quite different, but that's why it's good, because you're looking at the range of responses. So for example, if we're talking about at a very broad level Brand USA, qual's going to help us understand people say this and they say this and they say this and they say this and say this. So it gives you the range of opinion. It can be a very broad range. We can't tell what is the actual leading opinion through a focus group. We need a survey to do that, but at least we can work out what those possible opinions generally are, and then we can put that into a questionnaire. But, you know, to cut a long story short, qual's great, but the conclusions are researcher led. So you usually have to, there's usually a lot of interpretation there. And so you have to be very aware of context and quite careful, you know, bold but careful at the same time in terms of how you form your conclusions. So that's everything up until measurement research and survey research that I wanted to share with you. Does anyone have any questions about any of that, or has anyone done any focus group work before?
Hi, Michael. I don't think we've done much focus group survey. And then I think what we do is that, I guess all the programmers, they do like a market research, that the secondary research to know our audience. Then we have a program. Then we do a survey to the people who came to our program, so that you know, I was wondering, like, you know, how we should use that primary research to create a better, like, secondary research, which is our, like, poll, like, you know, usually done like post program survey.
Yes.
To find out like something new. Is that qualitative better than quantitative, or do you have any suggestions?
So Micah, there's two kind of things here. There's, so like, how do I measure the response to the program in a way that is easy for the participant to understand how to answer, and that also that you understand what their answers mean? So that sort of lends itself to a fairly simple, straightforward kind of approach. But you can, afterwards, you can also get people in a group discussion. So you might say, here's my survey. I'm going to get, you know, 5 people who said their overall rating was poor. Or, you know, people don't usually say poor, right? Like, because, you know, the people who were not really enthusiastic. So you could get 5 people who loved the program, and you get them together and just talk to them about it. What did you like about it? What did you not like about it? You know, where did you hear about it? You know, who did you come with, and what did they think about it? And, you know, so a focus group is good for that, because you'll get more. If you get a group of people together, they'll also sort of feed off each other, and you'll generate more new thoughts about it. But I'd divide it up into the people who were not so enthusiastic, or the people who were sort of sitting on the fence. We're going to get into performance rating scales for sure. And we'll look at different ways we can do that. But I'd get the people who were sort of not so enthusiastic, and I'd talk to them. And I'd talk to the people who are, and I'd do it separately, so that you don't have the enthusiastic people shutting down the people who are not enthusiastic, and vice versa as well. So you can have like a really good conversation about what were their needs going into this, were the needs met, what would they like to see next time. It's that ideation part that's quite useful too when you take the structure out. You can always put in a questionnaire, like what are your ideas for the next, what would you like to see in the next program. But people don't, unless you're standing there in front of them interviewing them, that can be hard to get that open-ended stuff out. So yeah, I hope that answers your question. I'd grab them after the people who answered the survey. I'd try to talk to them more. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, thank you. When we start like in-person programming, yes, but right now, like what we do is online programs, and it's actually hard for us to get a feedback.
Yes, yeah. Look, one point is, and let's hope we can get back to face-to-face, soon. But one actual advantage of the Zoom culture is that actually you can do focus groups on Zoom. So I think you've done surveys you've got feedback on Zoom, but you actually can grab people and get them to talk to you on Zoom as well. And I don't think you need to be too crazily structured in how you do that. Maybe you just have 5 questions or 5 topics you want to talk about and just see what happens. Like just having that dialogue with people, I think, is really helpful, and it help you to sort of round out the results. And you might also find that people give you a middling kind of rating, but they're actually quite happy. That's typical in Japan, right? People, we in sort of Western English-speaking culture, like, we'll give a high rating, and that's a high. The Japanese don't rate at the extremes of the scale usually, but it doesn't mean that they're unhappy. So, yeah. Any other questions about any of that?
Hi, this is Sasha. I work on the online magazine for our the embassy, and we actually have done a focus group and a survey about a couple of years ago that we were working with an agency for that. And first we did a survey, and then after the survey, we got about 5 young people, brought them to the embassy and did a focus group to ask them about their reaction to our online magazine, because we were trying to reach more young people for this magazine. And then, so I was sitting in another room listening to it, and it was really terrifying to hear what they were going to say about the magazine, but also really fascinating and really useful. And we were able to change, kind of tailor our content and change it a little bit to reach more young people, and we have seen good results from that. But we would like to do this more frequently, because that was 2 years ago, and so, and of course we were using an agency. It's quite expensive, so I'm hoping that we can learn how to do this ourselves so that we can do it more frequently.
Yes, I mean, look, any opportunity that you get to talk to your customer or your reader is an amazing opportunity to kind of co-create a better outcome with them. And it's very rare that you don't see an improvement when you've actually done that. But you could, I don't know if you have access to I don't know if you have names of subscribers, and because if you've got the names, then you're halfway there, because like in terms of your sampling and your sampling frame, you've got it like, you've got all of that there. So you could work out a way to invite them obviously you have a plan for what you do when you invite them. But recruiting the respondents is often one of the hardest parts, is one of the hardest things to sort of overcome when you're trying to do research. So if you've got your base already there, then yes, you can definitely recruit them to do more work.
Okay, thank you.
And hopefully by the end of this program too, you'll be confident about, writing your own questionnaires, and you can use your Survey Monkeys and, those kind of tools to do that.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Sure. Any other questions or comments, anybody? Okay, well, I will move on to the main course, if you like. That was the starters there. So measurement research here. So once we have a handle on the range of opinions in a category, and I highly recommend that you get a handle on the range of opinions before you do any kind of questionnaire or measurement. So in other words, what are people saying? What do people say? What are they talking about? Like, well, what kinds of things do they talk about in this topic? And what are the overall category dynamics? When we know those things, we may want to put some sizes and probabilities on that. That's really what measurement research is about. Sound measurement also is useful to gain credibility and confidence for all types of business decisions. So, for example, Sasha, as you were saying before, like we decided to include more content in our publication on topic X, on video games, because that's what people are really into. And well, why did you do that? Oh, well, because we have this data that we collected, and it showed that this would make people read the magazine more deeply, or more likely to reread, or whatever. They're the types of business arguments you can make. Defining measurement. Well, that's assigning numbers to things in accordance with specific criteria to represent quantities of attributes. Now, I don't expect you to remember that definition, but basically measurement is about numbers. It is about producing numbers. You're producing data. And as I've said before, you sort of really need to understand where those numbers came from. We need to look at the way that people would typically respond, so that we can tell whether a response is expected or not expected. That's very important. It's that thing that sticks out where the learning comes in research, I think. So why do we measure? Well, organizations, and I suspect your organization, often want to address an issue connected with return on investment. Maintaining situational awareness of your audience, or de-risking. You need to work out how to realize the best result for the significant investment that you're making in marketing and communications, because all of these activities require an investment, but research and surveys can show you what that outcome is. So, if it's not clear already, quantitative research uses surveys to measure market characteristics, attitudes, and behaviours. A questionnaire is the instrument we use at this stage. As I mentioned before, questionnaires should usually not be used for exploratory purposes. So if you know very little about a target group, or very little about an issue, a questionnaire may not be the right instrument for this. Survey may not be the right tool. If you don't even, and one way to tell that is if you're having trouble writing the questions, you might not even know what the questions need to be. But what type of projects use quants? So measurement can include opinion polling. So we all know what opinion polling is, but that's generally done on very population representative samples. We can do what we call market profiling surveys. So we may want to know, for example, in the soft candy category, you know, who buys each type of brand? Is it more male, female? Is it older? Is it working people? Is it people at home? So on and so forth. Market sizing and demand estimation, category usage and attitudes. Another big area in quantitative work is segmentations. It's very complicated type of project segmentations. Brand image and brand equity, testing of concepts and products, and advertising communications effective testing and tracking. And that is not a exhaustive list of what you can do with quant. So there's all sorts of things you can do with quant. I think the one area where you get the most return on investment for quant, I think, is testing, because testing helps you make changes before you go into a program or before you launch a campaign or whatever it is that you're doing. The research can lead you to make changes and make positive changes. That to me represents good ROI on the investment you're making. The other area, of course, is experience surveys too. So like customer satisfaction, program experience, that kind of stuff can be very good because it gives you very direct feedback. Something works, doesn't work, you can fix it, you can change it. So you can test before, you can, in a sense, you can pre-test and you can post-test as well. And if you, let's say if you're running regular programs, you may want to even have a standard methodology for pre-testing the program and a standard methodology for post-testing. And the reason why you may want to standardize it is because the data are more understandable if you always ask them the same way. I'll talk a little bit about that in a while. Yeah, qualitative or quantitative, as I say, decision whether to use qual or quant. Am I building theories or am I testing them again? Sometimes you're not going to have enough respondents to actually run a survey. Sometimes you'll see this in some industries, like the number of buyers for, let's say if I'm selling, steam turbines for electricity generators, maybe there's 5 buyers in the whole country on that. So we're not going to do a survey of those people. So if you have a very small population there, you can sometimes doing qual can be better. Usually qual comes earlier than quant. You do your exploratory before you do your quant. But as I mentioned, like let's say after program, you can certainly do follow-up qual. So you can do qual after quant as well. And I think I've made this point on exploration versus measurement, so I'm not going to belabor that. But quant research, we might be looking at calibrating market size. For example, we may make a population survey and ask how many people are in the market for concept X. We use quants to establish facts about the market. We look at relative strength of perceptions. As I mentioned earlier, we can have a whole list of things that people might possibly say about us. But how do we know, like, what's the stronger perception? What's the weaker perception? What perceptions are correlated with each other? We can work out with quant, which kind of shows, speaks to this kind of showing relationship. So when you do customer experience work, you can model process attributes against perceptions of overall performance. So you can work out, okay, out of all of the service experience attributes, it might be only 1 or 2 that are actually requiring to be fixed because they actually impact overall satisfaction significantly. So in other words, in an environment where you have limited resources, it allows you to kind of zero in on the one thing or the 2 things that you need to focus on. And quant research can be used to predict outcomes as well. I mean, a classic is looking at advertising testing. So we show people ads and we ask them, are you likely to buy this product after having seen the ad? And we can model that against in-market responses. So just speaking to my earlier point here, quant allows us to establish benchmarks too. So if you've got a reliable and standardized technique, you can have some confidence around that. You can create action standards that are agreed by everybody. And then, you know, the process of the research has higher credibility and more relevance. So just as I say, one example might be if you as an organization were to agree, this is the way that we always pre-test our events or our event concepts, or this is the way that we look at event satisfaction or program satisfaction or whatever. We have standard set of questions. We might do 30 of these projects a year. Over time, you build up this amazing database. So we know, oh, typically, you know, people answer this way. So this was a really good event, or this was not such a great event. That kind of thing really helps. As I say, with quant, you're generating numbers and you need context and sort of understand where those numbers come from and how you expect people to respond. If you don't do that, data can be hard to interpret. So you want to give yourself like the best chance. So there's always error when you're collecting data as well. So there are two types of error. There's random error, which is just chance error that doesn't, and random error is something you don't really need to worry too much about because it's random. But the one that you do need to think about is systematic error. That's error resulting from your research design. And so your random plus your systematic error equals your total error here. So where do our systematic errors come from? So they come from the instrument. So, well, error, I'll give you, yes, thank you for the question. I'll go through the errors now. So it could be a badly written questionnaire, or someone might have actually put the wrong scale on the question. Or the questionnaire might just be so long that people give up on it and start just not really answering the questions properly. If it's a face-to-face interview, the interviewer can actually like impact the outcome. So the respondent may well be answering the questions in a way to sort of make the interviewer happy rather than actually answer the question truthfully. Sampling, again, you might, let's say if I'm sampling face-to-face in an event, like you may sample just the nice looking people and not the mean looking people. So you may sample the people that look like they've got time to answer your survey rather than, just, everybody with an equal chance of being sampled. So there are many, many sampling errors. I'm going to talk about that next week. And there can be processing errors. You can have like these fat finger mistakes. They actually happen all the time. So you really need to check your data tabulations when they come out. Like the scales can be reversed on so that it can come out in the tabulations in the reverse order to what it is on the questionnaire, and like there's all sorts of things that can happen. So question here is about what's the relevant number to make an appropriate analysis. Usually, like if the sample is randomly collected, you can look at as little as 30. We'd usually say 50 responses is a good one to look at. And then the minimum usually to test something is about 100. And then rules of thumb, usually these days when we do web surveys, we do about 1,000 people. So the bigger the sample, the better, as a rule. But you can go as low as 30 if it's sampled properly. In my opinion, you can go as low as 30. Like the numbers can be quite stable even at something as low as that. But of course, it's also important that there's no systematic bias in the way that you've sampled. So just the size of the sample doesn't necessarily mean that the analysis is actually legitimate or the conclusions are legitimate. If that answers your question. If not, shout out before I get on to the next one. Okay, cool. So big lookouts in quant first is reliability. Can we repeat our findings? If I put the same survey out next week, am I going to get the same results? More or less. If not, it's unreliable. The other issue there is validity. So are we exploring, appraising, or measuring what we purport to be? This is important. I mentioned purchase intent from an advertising test. So we'll show people an ad and we'll say, how likely are you to buy this cleaning product? Definitely, probably, may or may not, probably not, definitely not. And we look at and someone will say, well, just because someone said in a survey that they're going to buy the product, does that mean that they're really going to do that? And is that really a valid measure of purchase intent? Well, it is to a point. But we do need to be careful that we may sometimes think we're measuring one thing and we're not really measuring that at all. You know, we may be think we're asking behavioral intentions when that's not what people are answering in reality. Depends on the tool. Anyway, just suffice it to say, I hope that we've got the idea that there is a left brain aspect of research and a right brain aspect as well. I like the right brain aspect because it makes the left brain more relevant and useful. We have 15 minutes. So I'm just going to take you through an exercise, very simple exercise. Let's have a look at it. So let's imagine that you've been tasked with providing your management a health check on the image and reputation of brand USA in Japan. And you've got the budget to ask around 15 questions. So you don't have a huge budget. We're not doing qualitative work, although, you know, I'm sure you've got lots of work that you've already done that could be referenced, and that's perfectly legitimate to do that. And then just in terms of this exercise or this simulation, just to add a twist in the tale, think back to 2017 and think back to like what issues might have been circling around brand USA at that point in time. So does everybody understand what I'm talking? Is there anybody that doesn't quite understand what I'm saying here? You're going to have to make a survey. This is this exercise, right? You're being asked by your management to make a survey on brand USA. 15 questions. It's going to have to be quantitative. And we're 4 years ago, 4 years ago. Yeah. So new administration, issues, right? Issues in public image and stuff of brand USA. What are we going to do about how are we going to measure that? So first of all, what I'm going to get you to do, probably to think about it. I don't think we've got time to do it quite now, but think about it before the next class is how would we sort of write an overall research aim on this? Like, I think it's always like, if you think back to the beginning of today's session, I had like an overall aim of the program here, but like, I think it's a good practice to write an overall research aim before you start on a project. And this is also very helpful when you're actually having to explain to people what is the survey that you're doing. And when you present it, why did we do this work? What was the overall aim on this? So it's like a mission statement for the project. Everything you do on the project should be harmonious with this aim. It should integrate an understanding of the main problem or challenge that the project aims to address. And then it's a good practice to write at least 3 to 5 clear, precise research objectives. So you've got that overall mission statement. We are going to, what are we going to do? And then more precisely, what are we going to do? So this always forces you to think about what the limits of the project are, because you need to focus. So there's all sorts of things that we could put into a questionnaire. There's all sorts of things that we could put into the research, but you've only got 15 questions, right? So you need to focus. You need to look at, where am I going to get the most, the most return on investment for filling the survey. Here's an example of an overall research aim, just so that you're not going into it completely blind, right? So this is a project that we did for, I did mention the quick service restaurant chain there. So we put the overall research aim is to illuminate the way in for our clients' holistic offering into the QSR market and set the stage for transformation of the category. So the aim there, it's also a little bit, there's a little bit of sort of motivation for the people who are sort of sponsoring the survey and, need to interact with it as well. This is important, right? We're setting the stage for transformation of the category. So think back to 2017, what's your overall aim? What are you trying to do? What is this survey for? What are you trying to do? What's the point? And then in terms of sample research objectives, I'll give you a list of, these are quantitative objectives, by the way, too. Here's a list of specific research objectives that you may want to sort of think about that context and then sort of, re-put them. But measure, so first objective here is measure the quick service restaurant category funnel. So this is where we ask things like, what brands are you aware of? Which brands would you consider going to? Which brands have you been to in the past? Which ones would you which do you go to regularly and which would you go to again? We may want to define customer attitudes to quick service restaurants. So why do you go to quick service restaurants? Why do you not go? Are you guilty about going? Is it, calibrate customer expectations. What are people's expectations when they go to quick service restaurants? Rate customer experience. So when you went to McDonald's last week, how would you rate the overall experience, etc.? How would you rate the staff? How would you rate the food, etc., etc.? Quantify brand image of leading brands in QSR space and do an audit of marketing communications and then a brand X concept appraisal, right? So this is fancier than 15 questions, but like the reason why I'm showing it to you is because you have this language around measurement in your research objectives. So it's like measure, define, calibrate, rate, quantify, audit, appraise. Although you can, of course, you can do a lot of that qualitatively as well. So, but it's like, what are the actual things you're doing in this survey? So the research aim is overall, what's my mission for the survey and what do I hope to get out of it? What should we as an organization hope to get out of and be empowered to do what at the end of it? That's your research aim. And then the research objectives are those specific things that you're going to get out of it. So if we're doing the same for Brand USA, I would ask, well, what should our overall research aim be? This is something to think about in the next week, because we're going to actually look at the actual questionnaire that we wrote in our agency addressing those issues. And we're going to look at the actual data that came out in 2017. And it's all there. So we will be able to look at this. But first of all, let's think about, if you were doing it, what would be the research aim? My research aim was to help our clients because most of our clients are US brands, my overall research aim was to help our clients understand the new environment that they were facing in 2017 and what the impact of the new administration would be on likelihood to buy US brands and by extension their brands. That was our aim. But your aim might be slightly different, being in the diplomatic corps. But what are our objectives? So what should we aim to get out of this more specifically? Focus on the scope of the survey and state your objectives in measurement language, because that's what we're doing in a questionnaire. And as I said, you've only got budget for 15 questions. So in the roughly 5 minutes that we have left, does anybody have any questions or concerns about that task? Like, it's something certainly we can next week we can look at some of your answers to that. But is the question clear? Okay. Very, very, as I say, just to sort of, at the risk of repeating myself, it's very, very important to have a very clear idea of what you're doing and the scope of what you're doing, and the knowing also that you can't do everything. You can only, there's always going to be limitations. There's going to be limitations on budget. There's going to be limitations in terms of what your organization wants you to be questioning people on. There's going to be also limitations in terms of what is reasonable to expect the respondent to answer. So yeah. So now is coming down to your last chance to make any final comments or observations or complaints or anything about anything that we've spoken about today. And also, by all means, think about if there's anything that's sort of captured your imagination and you might want to look at that in the next 3 weeks, then that's fine too. Just to let you know, next week we're going to look at sampling in detail. So I'm going to also get you to think about what the sample should be for this project. So next week you should have your research objectives sort of in your back pocket, your research aim and your research objectives, and then we'll look at the sample. And I'll take you through it's still a fairly top level view of sampling, but I think sampling is very, very important for you to be confident in, because the first thing when you present a survey, when you present quantitative research, the first thing you need to do is present the sample distribution in your survey. If there's a problem in the sample distribution of the survey, you won't be able to present the results because it'll be dead on arrival. And you don't want to be asking question after question after question as to who is in your sample. So the sampling is very, 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 very critical. So guys, that's pretty much all for today. So if you do not have any further questions, I am going to sign off.
Thanks, Dom. I also wanted to let everybody know that you've all been added to a Teams, a Microsoft Teams, and in there we can have threads and discussions. So I'll start one for general ideas or insights or takeaway. So if you didn't get a chance to talk during class or anything like that, feel free to post stuff in the discussion board. Start side conversations if you like there, and if there's anything in particular, we can we can use that to address in future classes as well. So if anybody doesn't have access to that already, let me know, but I think that you all are there. And Dom, for the assignment, did you want them to write anything and submit it to you, or just for discussion next week?
Just bring it to next week, you know, just have something written down. It's literally, you know, it's 50 to 100 words on the research aim, and it's, you know, 4 to 5 bullet points, and I'll call on people randomly to share it. Yeah, but just, you know, like I think what'll be interesting to see is like how people's aims might be a little bit different, and sort of getting that kind of view over a multiple people and what those aims should be. I think aims and objectives could be quite interesting, actually.
Okay. So a few people should come prepared to share.
It's 10-15 minutes work. I think it's it's cool.
Okay.
Yeah.
And Kelsey, thanks very much for all of your comments in the chat and everything. You know, it's clear that the embassy has a lot of vocabulary and language in place. I noticed you had mentioned some things like your engagement ladder and your different audience segments, and so this is clearly some conversations that you all have had internally a lot. Is there anything that you wanted to from the takeaways from today that you wanted to maybe frame in terms of the own language and the own vocabulary that you all are using on a daily basis?
Yeah, thanks so much, Justin, and thanks, Dom, for the great presentation today. And team, I know this was a lot. That's why I was trying to provide some context in the chat box. The reason that we asked someone that's outside of the State Department or outside of the embassy to conduct this training is because the private sector is pretty far ahead of us, I think, in that they do this market research all the time. And so it's new for us to kind of think about it in terms of our audience and how we think about getting information from them to improve our programs, improve our reporting, and really be able to measure to make sure we're reaching our goal. So that's why I think a lot of this terminology is new. So thank you for your patience. I think a lot of this was, or all of this may have been just a lot to take in. So I know that it is daunting. So hang in there. And I think, yes, I wanted to highlight throughout the PDSI process, in my comments, I was trying to feed in what we've already discussed. So our audience personas, really finding out what are the values, what are the motivations that are driving our audience so that we know how to reach them, right? We need to figure out how they communicate so we can know what medium we need to publicize the program on, for example, or how do we follow up to get that information in a survey. And then, of course, looking at the quantitative and qualitative, right? I think right now we're doing a lot of quantitative, which is the survey polling, polling, and then some qualitative, right? When we're getting open-ended questions or we're conducting separate focus groups or interviews with certain segments of the audience. But I think that's still pretty limited. So right now we just want to get a sense of, this was maybe a foundational explanation of how experts in market research, market analysis, kind of approach this and to look at all the tools that are out there. And then we're going to hone that in a little bit more in the coming sessions about, okay, these are the tools that we use. This is how to improve our usage of them to get better data that is more actionable, meaning we can take, answer the questions that we have and then use it directly to inform our future programs, to measure our impact, and then to be able to make that into something that is usable for reporting possibly as well. So we hope that this is, again, a little bit separate so that it's not within our PDSI process entirely. We wanted to give you kind of what the rest of the world talks about when they are looking at market analysis and market research, which is really what we're doing, like learning about our audience. So thanks for joining us today. And we have our homework from Dom is to kind of draft this goal. What is the goal that we're trying to reach with our survey? And then what are some points that we can ask? What are those questions that we could draft? So we hope that everyone will take a chance throughout the next week to kind of jot down their thoughts so we can share that next week. And yes, I think we have some folks that have reached out to either Cognosan or Ueda-san if they're having access issues with the Teams channel. So we'll follow up with you, Justin, I think offline to make sure everyone has a chance to access. But then do follow up with us, share your thoughts. We want to make sure that we're making this most effective for you all as well. So let us know how we're doing. And if there are additional questions you have, right? You are our audience for this training. We want to know how to meet your needs. So thanks so much, everyone. Dom, of course, for presenting. Apologies, there's construction. So if it's a little loud over here, they're like jackhammering upstairs. And thank you, of course, Justin, for organizing and facilitating everything today.
Okay, wonderful.
Thank you. Thanks, guys.
Yeah, thanks very much, Dom. So next week we'll get into the design elements of questionnaires and surveys, and then as we progress through, we'll start to talk a little bit more of, once you ask your questions, what do you do once you get the results back, and how do you begin to really tell a story with those results. So very much looking forward to next week, everybody. Have a great afternoon.
Okay, bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone. お疲れ様でした。
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you.